on the crisis, learning and creating meaning. So it's not just about the investigation process. Um, and it says effective crisis communication should not get mired down in the investigation process, but rather, again, offer a vision for a renewal, a new organizational sort of ethos. So that's really important, I think. The fourth misconception here is that crisis communication is solely about getting information out to stakeholders, and there's some other chapters that talk about the stakeholders, all the people that might be impacted by the crisis. And basically, they say that that's sort of bad. You can't have like one scripted message that you send out to everybody. Everything is always contextual. You've learned this in Comm 100. That what you might say to this audience is something different than you might say to this audience, because you have to reach them differently. You got to send different messages to folks who might have stock, real stock, STOCK, in your company versus the people that are suffering in some sort of poor neighborhood because your company did something stupid. But in any case, so it talks about that type of stuff and how clearly organizations work with stakeholders to consider risk before a crisis and develop a crisis needs assessment, blah, 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 blah. However, crises are dynamic and by definition a surprise to most all the people impacted by the event. This is important, the best crisis messages, and this is on page 17, in this book come from leaders who responded to a crisis authentically based on laudable values and what they believed was in the best interest of their stakeholders. In each case, they met regularly with stakeholders to hear their concerns. The fifth misconception, crisis communication involves taking a rigid and defensive stance. That's bad. Don't do that. Folks have to be flexible, have to be agile. We live a crisis, it creates uncertainty. So we can't just stick to our guns, stick to the rules, be defensive. We got to be very, very flexible. It gives a really good idea or example of Rudy Giuliani post 9/11. He frequently had press briefings. He didn't have all the answers, but he was engaged and agile and effective in his response to crisis. So don't be rigid, don't be defensive. Be flexible and agile, because you really don't know what's going on in a lot of situations. 6, crisis communication is about enhancing elaborate prefabricated crisis plans. It's about enacting elaborate prefabricated crisis plans. No, that's a misconception. They say here, you can have a crisis plan in place, but that's not always going to work. And I love this. This is important. I put a little star by this paragraph. This is again on page 17 at the very bottom. Although crisis plans can be helpful in preparing for a crisis, the best predictor of effective crisis management is strong, positive stakeholder relationships. As you read the cases in this book, pay special attention to how many effective organizations relied on stakeholders to support them during a crisis. For this reason, organizations looking to prepare for crises should work with their stakeholders to establish strong, positive relationships with them. We recommend that organizations work through problems and concerns before a crisis happens, blah, blah, blah. Organizations that spend time establishing these relationships are better able to respond to the needs of those groups following a crisis. So maybe reach out to folks who live in flood areas and create and establish really strong bonds and relationships before a flood happens. But in any case, so that's a pretty good and important one. The next one, crisis communication, is about reassuring the public about the impact of the crisis to avoid panic. Again, that's bad. You can't say, oh, it's just a little oil spill. That's bad. Don't reassure. I mean, you don't want panic, I suppose, but you have to be honest with folks. Folks who are honest and authentic are much better. Basically says the more you can do as a crisis communicator to help protect your stakeholders, the better. Over reassuring stakeholders about the outcome of a crisis is sure to kill the credibility of any spokesperson. Number 8, the 8th misconception, is to say no comment or to stonewall. No, that is bad. You have to constantly communicate with folks. It says effective crisis communicators meet regularly with their stakeholders and the media to answer questions, remain open and accessible, keep everyone updated with information about the crisis, sometimes even if you don't have new information. So the more you keep people in the loop, even if that loop is, we don't know, we're still trying to figure things out, I think that's good. 9, misconception 9 is to focus more on the organization's image and less on solutions to the crisis. This is the stuff that I absolutely hate. It's not about image or reputation repair only. Yeah, that's part of it. But if that's all you're oh, we're BP, we're cool, please like us and buy our gas. That's bad. That's bad. It says ineffective crisis communicators try to control their image, scapegoat other parties, and absolve themselves from blame. It's not our fault. Once a crisis occurs, there's not much that can be done to save or repair an image. Rather, this is important, effective crisis communicators focus on finding solutions to the crisis and lessen the impact on those most impacted by the crisis. We contend, this is muy importante, we contend, page 18, read it. We contend that it is impossible to control the image or reputation of a company. Multiple events and perspectives by many different stakeholders comprise the overall image or reputation of a company. Ultimately, we argue that organizations should control what they can, which is correcting the problem and learning from the crisis. So it's not just about image repair. It's not just about your reputation. It's bigger and more important than that. And you can renew. And then the final misconception is that spin is a viable option to effective crisis communication, which is sort of like the, over reassuring, but spinning it a particular way. Oh, it's not that bad, or blah, 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 blah. Spin only makes the crisis worse and makes the crisis communicator look unethical and irresponsible once the truth comes out, and it will come out. So if you spin, you will not win. And then they have a little summary. And so I like the book, the first one sort of ends, the first chapter ends with all these various misconceptions, because some of the research that I've done and some of the stuff that I've seen is some of these things become like, this is what you should do for crisis communication. And that ain't right. So this is some good stuff. So hopefully you enjoyed chapter 1 and you enjoyed my delightful lecture. For those of you who are in my day class, because of MLK Day, I'm making this recorded lecture for both my evening class, which is the hybrid class, and the day class. For the day class, I will see you next Wednesday, and what we'll do is we'll go back and sort of play around with these ideas in chapter 1. For those of you who are in my evening class, I will see you Tuesday evening, and we'll generally do the same things, or play around with these ideas. And also, if you are in my evening class, the first thread for our threaded discussions is up, and basically asks you to find an example crisis, but explain why you think that event is a crisis in light of Table 1.1, the components of a working definition of organizational crisis. Unexpected, non-routine, produces uncertainty, creates opportunities, threat to image, reputation, or high priority goals. Thank you for watching. Folk fell again. Not a crisis. This has been Jason Munsell. This has been the first online lecture for crisis communication. May the force be with you.